Hello, welcome to the Paddock Pass Podcast, brought to you by Renthal Street. Check out renthal.com for all of the different parts you can add to your motorcycle. On today's podcast, we're going to preview the Aragon Grand Prix, and looking ahead to it, we've got the all-star crew, and Adam, Neil, and David able to give us all their insight from the paddock. And Adam, I'm going to come to you straight away because undefeated in 2 matches for QPR now. You must be on top of the world, outside the relegation zone, 3 games into the season.
It could be better though, Steve. A pretty decent start. We've got a few good players coming in, so it all has to bed in, of course. Start of the season, but there's a long way to go. It's nice to have the football back, I have to say, because it's been 3 Grand Prix in a row for motocross. I don't know how many I've done in a row now and combined with MotoGP. But yeah, I'm a little bit wary of motorcycles.
Well, at least the football's back to give you that nice distraction after what must have been about 3 weeks without football. It was a long stretch for us. And Neil, obviously, I didn't mention it last week. Good win for Liverpool at the start of the year. As an Ipswich fan, I just have to wait for the points deductions, penalties to come in for all the teams to know that we're going to stay up this year. But how's everything for you?
Everything's good, yeah. Adam's definitely in the right place if he's sick of motorcycles. We're going to be talking about them for about an hour here. And yeah, unlike Ad, I've been trying to actually do a bit of a football detox. I overdid it at the Euros somewhat. I think I watched every match except 2. And I had a quiet word with myself afterwards that maybe there was just a bit too much football in my life. So I'm trying to wean myself off for at least a month or 2. With limited success so far, I must say. But yeah, that's the kind of plan of attack.
That's something I've been doing for nearly 60 years, and I can really heartily recommend it. It's fucking great.
That's why you're such a sour man, Dave. You know, you need to sort of broaden your football horizons. That's right.
Oh, goodness me.
Yeah, that's what's wrong with your character.
Yeah. But I mean, like, I've sat next to you while you've watched football, and it just generally seems like the most painful, existentially torturing experience that I've ever come across. It's quite remarkable.
It's very exhilarating as well. And Neil, how can you detox when Liverpool are playing? I mean, surely you have to watch them at least.
Yeah, you just sort of pay a passing interest, really. Try not to watch the game live, maybe watch like highlights. It's just for a month or 2.
I like this approach though, Neil. You've become like most other football fans where it's just like, I'll watch the United game next week, and then I'll watch when the Champions League starts. And then as the season wears on and I know that we're competitive again, I'll start to get more interested in it. And I can understand that. As a Dundalk fan as well, that's basically been how Dundalk fans have been over the last couple of seasons as well. But obviously, no one's tuned in or is watching us on YouTube to hear us natter on about football. We've got a MotoGP this week, back to Aragon, and it's going to be a good weekend, and we'll look forward to that at the end of this pod. We're going to kick things off though straight away with a little bit of a general chat about GP and one change that we'd all like to see. So, Adam, I'm going to come to you straight away for what's the one change you'd like to see MotoGP make?
The one change, can I have 1.5? The one change I'd like to see,
you were given advance notice. It was one change, Ad.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one change with a sort of, token mention of another. There you go. Very quickly, I'd like to see the calendar more spread out. I realize I'm talking about a subject of MotoGP and maybe sports promotion organization in general that is extremely difficult, very intricate with lots of moving parts, many different considerations. But I would like to see it just like less congested. I think, if you had 2 to 3 weeks between every Grand Prix, I'm trying to work out whether that would actually be a positive thing or not. But then having MotoGP running from, say, the beginning of February right until the end of November, which is entirely possible if you have the sport on a global scale with lots of different climates and territories, you can make that happen. I think it would be, maybe less taxing for people that are working in the sport, maybe more interesting for fans that can get some build up to the events, maybe better for riders as well who are struggling with some small injury issues. I say this as we're on the cusp of heading into an extremely busy period of the 2024 schedule. But I also think it might just extend the interest in MotoGP, and whether that means I'm really hesitant to say more races. But if you did have 22, 23, maybe even 24 Grand Prix spread out over an 11-month period, I know that also means no off-seasons for the team to do development, but then, something's got to give. And my token mention is just to the the media landscape of the sport. I'd like to see MotoGP relying less on locked out TV contracts to exclusive live broadcasts, because I think that would also widen the possibilities for more people to find MotoGP or touch MotoGP in other ways without having to, having the whole thing so well guarded, I suppose, or gatekept, if that's such a word. So yeah, that's my effort.
I really like Adam's idea. I think it's a really good idea. I mean, it's practically impossible, especially with 22 races. 22 races, if you have one race every other week, would be 44 weeks, which would give you basically December and January off, and you'd be racing pretty much sort of February the 1st. But yeah, no, just like, cutting back on triple headers and having sort of double headers instead, that would be like a huge improvement. And of course, the biggest problem is that it's the cost. The reason why all of the Asian races are all sort of what do you mean? I call it bundled together, is because the circuit or the teams and Dorna can't afford to have people fly out and fly back in again. Everyone gets on a plane, goes away for 3 weeks, and for some people it's nearly 3 months, or like 2 months, 2.5 months, and then only comes back home after that again. So yeah, unfortunately, MotoGP isn't rich enough to do that. But I do think if we could split the Asian races, so some of the start of the season and some of the end of the season, would be a massive improvement.
Yeah, and it's one of those ones as well, Dave, that with the calendar changing slightly for next year, with Thailand opening the season a little bit earlier, it opens up, even if it's only a week, it opens up a little bit of extra time. And then this year, I think the first European race was Jerez at the end of April. Next year, it looks like it's going to be Jerez at least 2 weeks earlier, maybe 3-4 weeks earlier than that. So at least then it means that you're not quite as condensed. And maybe then you can spread out a little bit more inside the season. For me, one of the things that I find interesting just about what you mentioned there, Dave, about the 44 weeks, is that I'd really love to see World Superbikes be the winter championship and MotoGP through the season. And then you're actually able to have it where between 12 Superbike rounds, 13 Superbike rounds, and 20 MotoGP rounds, 21 MotoGP rounds, that you're then able to have 30 or 35 weeks of motorbike inventory. And then for the championships, then you've actually got it where with a single owner, you can actually have a little bit more to play with the calendar as well. So that's one of the things that calendar-wise I'd like to see change. Then, at the end of the day, the TV thing is always an interesting one, because to open things up to more people, it's probably the easiest way to do it, but it's also very difficult, like David said, just because of the way the contracts are. But that's those long-term things that need to be looked at, and it'll be interesting to see what happens if and when the Liberty deal comes through to be able to make that change. But Dave, just to come back to you as well, what would be the one change you'd like to see?
The one change I'd love to see is I love the sprint race podiums. I think they're so good. They're so much better than the regular podiums. It's a celebration among the crowds. To me, motorcycle racing is much more of a people sport. It's much more of a sport for the fans, and I would love to see getting the fans much more involved. I love the World Superbike podium. I think it's absolutely amazing seeing the riders come in through like a wall of fans, and then having the podium right in the middle of the of Parc Fermé, surrounded by fans. Now you can't let fans into the MotoGP paddock because there's it's a question of scale. There's just too many people. It would be too busy. But finding a way to do that, to change, to have both the sprint race podium and the main podium outside in among the fans, I think would be a fantastic way of getting of bringing the sport into the fans, bringing the fans into the celebration, making the whole thing feel much more personal again.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones, Dave, that for the sprint race especially, it is one of those things where you could easily get it where that atmosphere spreads the whole way around. And Adam, I know that like at the Catalan Grand Prix, you've always loved where they've done that with the Monster Energy stage.
Yeah, or even in Austin as well, they kind of roll into this sort of amphitheatre they have on the inside of, was it turn 14? 15. I can't remember now, but I think Dave's spot on. I think it's something, we're lucky that we have the sprint format because they can be flexible with that. But then obviously, I think the podium is one of the main commercial sort of selling points for a brand. It's where, everything it's the one focal point of a race where all the attention, the cameras, everybody's eyesight is trained towards. So it's quite a valuable piece of real estate. And it's just got such a big tradition behind it. I mean, they've been messing with that. I mean, we've seen LED boards coming in. I think in Assen they had their own sort of special truck as their sort of podium presentation, and then you have a DJ. Mark is showing off his dancing moves. So there are sort of adjustments to the traditional podium setup. But I agree with Dave. I think it'd be something cool if they could try and mobilize that or make it a little bit different depending on each circuit.
Yeah, I think it's certainly one of those things that I quite like whenever they take some of the ideas from Superbikes and put them into GP, because then you see them on that bigger scale. And the podium as they have it right now is one of those things. Superbikes, obviously, with an open paddock, that's why you get that wall of fans as you come down through them, Dave. And that's what makes it a little bit different in Superbikes. But Neil, what about you? What's the one change you'd like to see MotoGP make?
Well, I think generally speaking, the introduction of the sprint races have been positive thing for MotoGP. I think the rework schedule works well. I like the dynamic of the weekend. I think it builds up very nicely. And before the sprints arrived, I thought the Saturday afternoon sometimes could lag a little bit, where you thought like, okay, we're all building towards qualifying, and qualifying isn't always the most thrilling spectacle, whereas now at least you've got a race on a Saturday as well as a Sunday. But my thought would be to maybe limit the sprints to 50% of the races that we visit. I think in that way it becomes a bigger event. It becomes something that really you look forward to and you get excited by. I was just thinking back to the sprint races this year that we've had, and I really struggled to remember any that stood out to me as fantastic or brilliant or really memorable. I think at the start of last year when it was introduced, we had a couple of thrillers. It was like everyone was putting absolutely everything into the sprints, as if it was the most important event in the world. And it's almost as if everyone has kind of realized that it's not quite worth the risk for, the possibility of scoring 12 points on a Saturday. And this year they've been pretty sedate, I would say, in general. And I think you could kind of enliven that up somewhat by having them at every other race or having them at select races through the year. So it's like, oh, cool, we've got a sprint this weekend. Whereas now it seems like, okay, yeah, when the sprint happens and it's maybe not the most exciting, then I think it just becomes like a sort of almost not meaningless part of the weekend, but something that you can forget about quite quickly. So, yeah, I would limit it to 50% of the races through the year. I know it's a very difficult thing for Dorna to do because they probably, when they sell the packages to the TV companies and to the circuits as well, there is that added promise of like, look, we're going to have an opportunity to bring more fans in on a Saturday. And I think there generally has been a big uplift on fans attending circuits on a Saturday, which has been a good thing. But I think Formula One maybe don't have enough of the sprint races on the Saturday. I think MotoGP maybe have too many. You could have something in the middle. So 50% of sprints, I think, would be a good tactic moving forward.
Also, I think one of the problems with the sprint race is that there are too many. It allows the teams to set up for the race on Sunday, so they've got too much extra information, too much extra setup information, and having us go back to like going into a Sunday race where people aren't sure about what the tyres are going to do would liven things up a little bit.
How would you implement the 50% ratio? I mean, how would you decide what races gets it? And also, I think, it'd be worth studying the attendance figures, because Dorna published them for all 4 days of an event. I mean, they're even counting sort of Thursday ones now when you have spectacles like the Day of Champions or something like in the UK. It'll be interesting to see how many or how much the figures have gone up for Saturdays and people are attracted to the circuit for the qualifying spot for the sprint. I know certainly in MXGP that was a sellable asset. That was one way in which the promoter was helping the local circuits entice fans to come for the full weekend and buy a larger ticket because you get that double dose of entertainment. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's something to delve into one of Dave's famous Excel sheets and see how the crowds have gone up on Saturdays compared to previous years.
It's a good idea, actually. Though I shall have to do that at the end of the year.
I think for how you would decide it, though, Ad, is clearly just who would pay the extra money. And there's your 10, 11, 12 MotoGP sprints decided for the year, and everyone's happy. Then you're able to make that little bit more money out of it all, which is obviously what's the key thing for pretty much any championship at this stage. And I think that kind of brings it into the change I'd like to see as well, which is I'd love to see a Grand Prix weekend that had World Superbikes in it as well, even if it was just the top class from both of them and we just went with that. A little bit like when we used to go to Laguna Seca for both series, it was only the Premier class first. So I'd love to see that change where we brought everything together and we were able to give ourselves the chance to be able to have one weekend of just that top class of racing. And I'd love to see something like that, even if it was just a, pick a racetrack and we were able to run something like that. I think it would be a fun way to be able to, from a World Superbikes perspective, to maybe try and get some more eyeballs on us, which would be something that I think everyone inside the paddock would love to see.
The other thing is it'd be really interesting. It'd be a really interesting, like you said, Laguna Seca is where we used to have just the senior classes. It'd be really interesting to see which track could host that, and it would make it. It's an interesting idea. I think it'd be very, very complicated, but fascinating.
We know which track should host it, and Adam, I know you'll get behind this. We make it just Phillip Island the last weekend of February. It's the opening MotoGP race of the year, opening World Superbike round of the year. You've already got it set up where we do the test in advance of the World Superbikes race in there. So then you can have your preseason test for GP, like we did the first year of the Michelins as well, and then your preseason test for World Superbikes, and then you go straight into the race weekend. That's the one edge. Then you can get Phillip Island in the sunshine like you've always wanted.
Nah.
And I still get to keep Phillip Island in the sunshine.
Nah, Steve, I thought you were going to say Circuit de Catalunya, which meant I could sleep in my own bed, which I would be completely on board with. But talk about, if you look at the whole MotoGP calendar and you look at, the Australian Grand Prix, then you just think, what are you doing? What is going on with that? How many more times do you need to see that you have a pearl of an event just like chucked in the garbage area of climate and opportunity at that point of the season? It's long overdue change.
Yeah, but I was told that the reason that is because the MotoGP race is run by the Australian GP Corporation, and they don't want MotoGP anywhere near Phillip Island or the Melbourne F1 race, so that they can justify their jobs for the entire season. So if you've got two events within a few weeks of each other, that's going to be no good to anyone. So, or it's not going to be any good to them. But yeah, obviously, MotoGP should be there. I think MotoGP and World Superbikes back to back at Phillip Island would be absolutely class.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones that everyone would love to see. We came close to it with Qatar in 2020 when they were doing all the resurfacing work in Qatar. The plan was MotoGP and then World Superbikes. And I remember I flew straight from Australia for it, knew that I wasn't going to get the Superbike race because COVID was already taken over and none of us really knew what was going to happen. And, there was so much hope for everyone in Superbikes on the Saturday and the Sunday in Phillip Island that we were going to have back-to-back with GP and we were going to kick things off in, great style. And then you ended up having a massive break. And, we'll kind of get down when we're previewing Aragon as well, a little bit about that. Some of my memories are staying in Aragon for all those races. And obviously, you would have loved it, Dave. Everyone else thought it was a bit of a disaster, but that's all right. We're going to move on to the next topic we have on today's podcast. And David actually is going to include an interview that you were able to take with Meregalli recently.
Yeah, exactly. I sat down in Austria with Mario Meregalli to talk to him about the basically Yamaha's MotoGP project, because it really seems like Yamaha are a long way behind. They've got a lot of work to do, but what we can't see is how much work is going on in the background. I mean, we know how much testing Yamaha have done. We know all of the things which are happening. And one of the things that was most interesting for me in chatting to Meregalli was the way that he said that they've completely changed the way that they work. And I think that is a real sign of hope and of progress for MotoGP or for Yamaha. I think they are going to catch up sort of soon. And yeah, I mean, Maya was a very open. He's a very sort of expressive, informative person, and it was a really good chat.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. We're going to have a little chat before we hear that interview as well. And Adam, I just wanted to ask you about, obviously for Yamaha, one of the big things that's going to change next year is they're back having a satellite operation with Pramac switching across. We've obviously talked about it on the podcast when this news was announced, but just how important is it for Yamaha to have that second team on the grid and an extra couple of bikes to give them data?
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned before, Steve, it's just doubling up. I mean, Yamaha lost when they lost, the satellite team to RNF. Of course, Tech 3 was the original loss. I think it was back in 2019 when the French team switched to KTM after what seemed like, well, it'd been decades with Yamaha machinery. I think Hervé Poncharal actually started running Hondas, if I remember rightly, in the 250cc class, but then switched to Yamaha. And obviously, there's a long decorated history there. And I think the biggest thing is that Pramac have their own long distinguished association with Ducati. So how is that kind of culture switch going to marry? You know, how are they going to, how is an Italian team who was very much part of an Italian structure now going to suddenly deal with a Japanese team and a Japanese way of working? I think that is something that might not hit the ground running straight away. There might be some sort of communication bumps in the road or organizational things to sort out. I think it would be slightly unrealistic, even if we forget about Yamaha's current competitive state, to assume that in 2025, Pramac Yamahas are going to be running near the front of the field. I think you have to give them time to sort of acclimatize. And that's why I think it originally was a 3-year deal for Pramac to run Yamahas. They're going to need more time than that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where time is of the essence for Yamaha, where they need the change to happen quickly, but they also need to be patient, particularly with the rules staying as they are. Neil, you wanted to jump in as well.
Yeah, I think, I seem to remember that Paolo Campinotti maybe mentioned something that he shouldn't have done at Assen when the announcement was made, which was that it was going to be a bit longer than that. I think he let slip it was going to be like, was it 6 or 7 years that he said? And then Lynn Jarvis sort of said, he wasn't supposed to tell that to the media. But so from that, you could kind of gather that, Pramac's looking at this as a very long-term project. And yeah, it will just be interesting to see how they kind of acclimatize to a kind of different way of working, and also just like a readjustment of what they can expect from a weekend. I mean, they've been fighting for the championship with Jorge Martin for the last year and a half, or the last calendar year, you could say, and then having to readjust to maybe trying to just scrabble for a top 10 at the start of next year is going to take some recalibrating. But I think everyone involved with Pramac, certainly with Campinotti, is aware that a new challenge was kind of needed, and there was that feeling of maybe being a bit dissed as well, which certainly I got from them at the Dutch Grand Prix when the announcement was made. Campinotti said, watching the Ducati engineers all celebrate when Bastianini passed Jorge Martin on the final lap for second place, that was almost like the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. He was like, well, hold on a second, you're celebrating beating us, but aren't we also part of Ducati, and aren't we also fighting for the championship on behalf of Ducati? And you kind of feel that there's that little sense of him being a bit slighted, and the operation being slighted to an extent. So, maybe that'll carry some extra motivation going into this new project with Yamaha.
Yeah, I think there's no motivation better than just having that vendetta against someone. And I think that certainly we're going to see that from Pramac, that they're going to be motivated to make this work. But Neil, just from your perspective as well, how important is it to get the right riders on the bike? Because obviously what we're hearing is Miguel Oliveira, Jack Miller. Are they the right riders to put on the bike, or is there someone else that you'd like to see?
I think of the riders available, Steve, they're probably the best options. Both have good experience of developing bikes and have a decent level, well, a very good level of experience on different types of bikes. This will be Miller's fourth different manufacturer in MotoGP if he does get confirmed with Pramac Yamaha, which we believe he will be. It'll be Oliveira's third. And, I think it'll be good for them to bring that kind of experience from KTM and Aprilia respectively over. Lots of experience there, maybe not riders that are going to be fighting for championships, even if they're on the absolute best bikes, but still, I think very good, experienced campaigners, which can bring a lot to the project. Also, probably feel that they have a big point to prove as well. And some of the interesting rumors coming out of Austria, where the Yamaha have moved to sign up. Obviously, we were expecting one experienced rider in that Pramac team next year and one rookie. It doesn't look as though that's going to come to pass, but Sergio Garcia, Tony Arbolino, Alonso Lopez were all linked with that second seat. And some rumors coming out of Austria were that they're trying to sign some of those riders to their Moto2 team, which I think will be, originally it was going to be the Pramac team next year. I'm not sure, it might still remain as the Yamaha Mastercam team, but basically the idea of it is to be a kind of feeder team, like the way Honda, KTM have in the Moto2 class as well. The rumor in Austria was that Yamaha have signed Arbolino to that team for next year, which is obviously maybe with the idea of seeing him step up with Yamaha to MotoGP in the future. So it looks like they're going deep on this. They're not just preparing for a satellite team, they're preparing maybe the next generation of MotoGP riders in a potential Moto2 outfit, which shows, I think, the kind of commitment that they're making.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Neil. And again, like you said, shows that progress and commitment that they're trying to do. And Dave, that kind of brings us into the last part of Yamaha as well, their test program, because obviously with their concessions, they're able to have a lot of testing. They've got Cal Crutchlow as their official test rider. Cal's obviously got his injuries, so Dovy's back on a MotoGP bike to be a Yamaha test rider. Augusto Fernandez looks like he's going to be their test rider next season as well. And Augusto making it perfectly clear that he sees that as a far more likely path back to MotoGP than moving back to Moto2 or moving to World Superbikes.
Yeah, what was interesting about the interview with Maya, which we'll hear in a minute, is that he says that he talks about the value of wildcards. And Augusto Fernandez was also talking about wanting to do as many wildcards as possible. Now, as a concessions class D, I think, or category D team, they get 6 wildcards. That's a lot of extra testing. And it means the tyres aren't coming out of the test allocation, so they actually get more time. You get a lot more tyres on a race weekend than you do get on or during a test. So that's good. I think it is normally you would say once you become a test rider, that's pretty much it. The other thing is that the Augusto Fernandez, it's not that he's being sort of added as just a test rider. The test team itself will be expanded to allow for more testing, and that's got to be good. And I think with the additional data from Pramac plus more testing next year, it's going to be just a really big step forward.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously a step that's needed for them. And Dave, we've got that interview now with Meregalli, so we're going to play that on, and then we're going to preview this weekend's action in Aragon.
I am here with Maio Meregalli, a team manager of the Monster Energy MotoGP team. Yamaha are in a very interesting situation. You've been through some difficult times. And especially since the start of this year, I think Lynn Jarvis told us in Sepang that this was a process that's been going on for a while in the background, but it feels like it's now come to the foreground that Yamaha is investing an enormous amount of energy into making progress. You're testing more than anyone. The concessions have helped, obviously. But how do you see where Yamaha is now compared to, say, a year ago or 2 years ago?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to start saying that in these difficulties, because we are facing this lack of performance since a few years, but I think we have been able to really show how Yamaha is determined and full committed because in this difficult situation we have been able to re-sign with Fabio. That for us has been always a priority. And we also wanted to confirm Alex because we are sure about his capability and what together they can bring to the team, Fabio and him. But also we were able to get a second factory team. That for me the Pramac is really an additional value, because from outside Pramac is technically wise for me the best independent team in the paddock. And so I'm proud of what Yamaha has been able to do in front of this difficult period. And then always talking about the commitment. I never saw Yamaha. I am here since 2011, and I never saw something like that.
No.
The concession for sure are giving us additional work, but we are really trying to exploit the concession as much as possible. We are also hiring engineers from other manufacturers. In the past, never happened. So if you consider that now the technical director is an Italian engineer in a Japanese manufacturer, this also means a lot. It means that we really changed the way to work. And we already starting seeing the difference.
Yeah.
But as you can imagine, this process is very long.
Yes.
And we started in Sepang, working much more on the bike. We have been always very conservative. We always make small steps. But now, if you see our bike, it's different compared before. We already introduced the second aero package. Leaving Austria, we will go straight to Misano for 2-day test. We will test the third aerodynamic package, and we will be able, if the result will be positive as we expect, to homologate this package in Misano race. So we have never been so active, and there is a much stronger relationship, collaboration, synergy between YNC, Yamaha Japan, and YMR, the base we have in Italy. The R&D that we have in Italy is expanding because of this synergy that in the past was unfortunately one way.
Yes.
Now is double way.
Yeah.
And this aspect is fundamental. In my opinion, it has been very important that who decide understood that the way that we were used to work, that was very good until a few years ago, now was a limit.
Yeah.
And we made this change. And but as I said before, it's a long procedure. No,
Process.
Process. But I'm seeing this, and even if it's tough, but it gives you extra motivation.
Yeah, when to actually see things change, to see your efforts turned into start to turn into results. How important is Pramac? Because this is also a change in the way. I remember previous Yamaha satellite teams were satellite teams. They usually had older equipment. They had less support. They were given what they needed to to compete. But this looks like more like, if you'll excuse it, the Ducati model, where you have basically a factory team and a factory junior team almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Where you're collaborating to move the project forward.
Yeah, they are going to be as a really second factory team.
Yeah.
There will be staff, Yamaha staff into the team. The bike will be the same. The fact that there will be 2 more Yamaha on the grid and 2 less Ducati on the grid
Helps.
This kind of sharing information we expect will speed up the procedure to improve the performance. In my opinion, is a win-win.
Yeah.
There were no better independent team in the paddock, and they are bringing their knowledge into Yamaha, and we really expect that together we will be able to improve the results and the performance of the bike in a fastest way, because we are seeing the difficulties that we have having only 2 riders,
Yes.
and in some occasion 1.
Yes.
Having 4, for sure, this procedure will speed up. We can really, sometimes it's difficult for us to compare everything.
Yeah.
Also the tires.
Yes.
If you have only 2 riders or 1.5,
Yeah.
it's complicated. In this way, we will be able to really share the homework.
Yeah, and having an injury, or when a rider is injured, then you lose 50% of your data, and when there's 4, then you're only losing sort of 25%, and that makes a big difference. Yeah. Do you know when? Obviously, you haven't signed any or you haven't announced any riders yet. We know that you'll be looking at riders with some experience, because that's part of what you need. There's also, do you go for?
I will turn this question to Lynn Jarvis.
Yeah, exactly. But it's an interesting. It's always an interesting when you're, because of the state of the progress, you have difficult choices to make in terms of this.
Yeah, in this situation, you think, okay, do we need experience? Do we need a rookie? Maybe 1-on-1?
Yeah.
Because sometimes you think, okay, an experienced MotoGP rider will bring for sure experience. If you maybe choose for a rookie, you think I take one young rider with a real clear mind.
Yeah.
And he will be only focused in
yeah, exactly.
keeping it open. And but so now we are really reaching the point where the decision has been taken.
Yeah.
And as soon as you will know.
Yeah. This process, obviously Yamaha are putting a lot of effort into this process, into becoming competitive again, because it's really important. I mean, you need to be fighting for podiums next year at least. You need to be top 5 by this year, but then you have to start all over again during 2026 for the regulation change in 2027. Is this process now experience for 2027, or is it will it be an obstacle because you're putting so much effort in now that you won't have to spare in for the next set of rules?
I think all the good things we will be able to bring in the next 2 years will be good also in 2027. For sure, we are taking in account everything about the new regulation, but we are really now focused in both in parallel.
Yeah.
In both things, to improve the current bike for 25 and 26, but also starting we already started thinking about the 2027 because I think it's logical and but in our mind the 80% of the 2026 bike will be moved to the 2027. Adjusted to the new regulation.
Yeah, exactly. So you're taking your because everything you learn, you keep building on everything you learn as you move forward. Yeah, exactly. The test team as well has been, because you've been allowed to test a lot. The concessions have made a big difference, and I think. I don't think Fabio has ridden a MotoGP quite so much bike in his entire life. The test team is growing as well. There's also talk of you looking to expand the test team, maybe.
Yeah, unfortunately, because this year Cal had a problem, and unfortunately we lost him. But fortunately we had a concession.
Yes.
So we didn't lose, let's say, time on track because we were able to manage by the factory rider.
Yeah.
But the intention is to expand the testing team. I think you already heard the rumors. We would like to have a young test rider.
Yeah.
And we were considering Augusto Fernandez. We just started talking, but the intention is to have an experienced test rider, but also a younger one.
Yeah.
Because we will also try to maximize the number of wildcards that we will be able to do. So I think having a young test rider will be easier for us to attend. Let's say the target is 6 by the regulation.
Yes.
And we will try to do as much wildcard as possible. In the past, we were thinking always to do 1 wildcard. Already this year, we planned 3. Unfortunately, we have to withdraw the wildcard in Misano because Cal is not available, and also Remy there is a clash with the Superbike Championship. But we still have 1 in Motegi, and we are really hoping that Cal will be well on time of this wildcard. Otherwise, Remy will be available.
Okay.
So,
what's the value of a wildcard? How does it help?
It's helping in. The idea has been always to do the wildcard during the weekend, where on Monday we had the IRTA test.
Yes.
So the rider can get used of the track and then evaluate new components, but also on Monday evaluate something else.
Yeah.
For example, at the beginning we wanted to introduce the new aero package in Misano, and the idea was to introduce it with the test rider. But then luckily we have been able to organize a private test, so after here we'll move there. But we are able to fix this problem.
Yes.
But otherwise in Misano, Cal was going to ride with the new aero package, and then the race after, the factory rider were going to let's say that we were able to homologate the new aero package. It's good. Also, there is another aspect. We have to manage the quantity of the tire to develop the bike. If we do the wildcards, we don't use the tire in our allocation. So we will use the wildcard not just because we want to do a race, but just to evaluate new components and to keep going with the performance of the development of the bike.
Because also the value of a race weekend is you have lots of new tires, so you can practice starts, sprints, qualifying, that sort of thing, which can be a problem.
Yeah, and also to really evaluate the parts, there is nothing better than a race.
Yeah.
And so we think that with the speed that Augusto still have, will be an additional value.
Yeah.
So that is where we would like to end it up.
Yeah. Okay. Finally, will Yamaha win a race next year?
It's for sure the target is that one, but if we are really objective, it's difficult because we know that we reach where we are because most likely in the last 5 years we lose something.
Yes.
And the other had an incredible speed.
Yes.
So we, in our mind, we had 2 years. If things goes well, to be back again competitive.
Yeah.
So to win a race next year, for sure, if everything goes well, we might think that maybe by the end of the next year we will be closer.
Yes.
And if there is a specific circumstance, we might be able to win.
Okay.
But now it's very difficult to give you an answer because I know what we are doing and I know how difficult it is.
Yeah.
To be there, to get there. We have some reference now, and we know where we are, but it takes time.
Yeah.
To catch them, and for sure now we know where they are now.
Yeah.
So maybe in 1 year time, they will move.
Yeah, because you have to not only catch up to where they are, but catch up to where they will be next year. Exactly. Okay, Mayor Meregalli, thank you very much. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Great to have Mao on the podcast, and good insight as usual from you, Dave, for that interview. We're going to move on to the Aragon Grand Prix, back on the MotoGP calendar after an absence of a year. And Adam, has that absence made your heart grow fonder for Aragon?
I can't say it has, Steve. I'm always keen to go to a race, but this one, it does have the benefit, of course, like living in Barcelona, it's only a 3-hour drive, and not having to go to an airport is wonderful. But there's something very soulless about this Grand Prix, which is kind of ironic, really, considering Alcañiz has a sort of quite a strong motorcycle racing history of the old street track that used to go around the town. But yeah, it's just the desolate location of MotorLand and Aragon just embeds itself into the whole sort of experience of the Grand Prix. So it's not sort of one I rush to. I think I'm still baffled every time we go to Aragon or Motorland for a Grand Prix, how the paddock struggles to find accommodation. So how do you expect 30, 40, 50,000 people to be able to roll up and visit this place? It just doesn't make much sense to me. But as a racetrack, it's kind of cool. It's kind of fun, and we've seen some fantastically close Grand Prix there over the years. I think going back to sort of, or if we look at all the Grand Prix races that have been there, including the double during the pandemic championship, then they've all been sort of decided by fractions of a second, apart from Morbidelli's win, which was won by like just over 2 seconds, I think. So it does have a bit of a precedent for close action right until the finish line. So there's that.
Yeah, I mean, the racing is great, but I also absolutely adore the location.
Well, go on holiday then. You don't need to work there at a race.
But we usually do, but unfortunately they're doing stupid back-to-back races, so we couldn't. But it's just I think that it's a unique location. It is it's very arid. I remember talking to Michael Scott once, and he compared it to the high veld in South Africa, and sort of outside Johannesburg. So, yeah, I love that stillness. I love the fact that it is such a remote location, that it's such a quiet location. It really gives it something special. I mean, yeah, it would be nice if there were sort of like more hotels around. But I mean, what you've seen, the reason for having the race there is to get more tourists into the region. Now, there's nowhere near enough accommodation for everyone to actually stay there. But it has, I mean, in all the years that we've been going, since what is it, 2012, 13?
11.
11, that's right, 2011. You've really seen
10.
amount. Oh, yeah, yes, that's right, yes. Yes, 2010. Yeah, I mean, you've really seen the amount of accommodation really step up. You've also seen a certain amount of sort of wealth go into the area as well. There is much more tourism. There's much more put on for tourism. It's a fantastic place to actually go for a holiday. If you want to go hiking, if you want to go mountain biking, if you want to go cycling, if you want to go motorcycle riding, if you want to go off-road riding, if you want to take your Jeep up a mountain. If you want to go canoeing, if you want to do whatever, there's literally, there's so much to do. You can go fishing in the Ebro, which is quite close by as well. It's amazing. So I absolutely, it's one of my favourite parts of Spain, but I realise that I'm a weirdo.
Steve, when did we suddenly get an insert from the Aragon Tourism Board into the podcast? I didn't remember seeing that memo on email, but
team at paddockpasspodcast.com if you'd like us to have a tourist brochure thrown in for every preview to the Grand Prix.
I like people to get excited about Grand Prix. I like history, I like atmosphere, and sadly MotorLand and Aragon just doesn't really have much of either.
Yeah, and Dave also left out his favorite part of the entire weekend is that he doesn't really have to deal with that many people, which I think is one of his biggest benefits.
What's not to like?
I always think for Aragon, like it's obviously different for superbikes because even compared to GP, it's a smaller crowd. We stay in the middle of Alcanes and we're in that hotel beside the roundabout, so it's a 5-minute drive in. But I remember whenever I was working there for GP, and we used to stay in that house that's half an hour drive away, 40 minutes away. And
50 minutes.
There you go. Like do you know what? It was a half an hour whenever I was in the car with Cormac, and it's 50 minutes when I'm in the car with you, Dave. But it was always one of those things that I always look forward to because that was one of the rounds where you guaranteed all of us would stay together and you'd have 8, 9, 10 of us in a house together. And it was just great fun. You'd come back in the evening, everyone would have their stories to tell, and we'd all sit around and get our dinner. And that, for me, is what the Aragon Grand Prix weekend was. But the problem with that is, even compared to 10 years ago, a Grand Prix weekend was a lot quieter. Now we've got, like Neil was mentioning, with the sprint races every weekend, every day matters more now than it did 10 years ago. And it's just bang, 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 especially when you throw in Moto E at a race and all those other things that crop up. And I think that's where, for me, Aragon it's lost some of that luster as well for wanting to go back to the GP there, just because what made it special and unique for me is probably not the case anymore, just because we've got more and more on the inventory of the weekend. But that being said, I still quite enjoy going to Aragon for the Superbike round. But I remember going during the COVID year when we had the back-to-back weekends there, 6 races in Aragon for Superbikes, and then you throw in 4 for 300s, 4 for Supersport. By the end of that week, I was there like, I never want to see Aragon again. And I probably went more into the Adam camp than the David camp. But Adam, one thing about Aragon, their contract is obviously 1 year on, 1 year off at the moment. Is that a good thing as well, where you're able to kind of spread things out a little bit more in Spain, like the hope and the expectation was?
Well, that's the other thing that goes against Aragon, Steve. It's just another race in Spain. I mean, the circuit obviously has enough revenue and business. I mean, Dave was mentioning about the rise in economic profile of the region because, they've resurfaced the track. I mean, that was kind of a stumbling block for other venues in the past, most famously perhaps Brno. But yeah, it's I don't think it was something we'll see again on the calendar next year. I mean, I think it will sort of flip-flop with other particular events. I mean, Valencia is always so strong and always the end of season finale holder. Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya has its own sort of strong position, and obviously ironclad link with the promoters themselves, and Jerez is a signature event on the calendar. So to squeeze Aragon in there in one particular season with the other 3, I think is quite a feat. Maybe it's indicative as well as the ability still for territories and circuits to stump up the cash to run MotoGP rounds. Perhaps that's something else.
Yeah, I think that is the big challenge, obviously. And one of the things about, you mentioned Catalunya and the links to the promoter, it looks like we're not going to have a Catalan Superbike round next year, which means that the Catalan GP, once again, is the only big motorcycle race that you're going to have. So it is one of those things where Catalunya looks very secure. Valencia, obviously, that end of season fanfare is always going to be important. Having somewhere that's got better chances of good weather at that time of year as well means that Aragon has to be at the latest this time of year. And Neil, we've seen that quite a few times in the past where a little bit later in the year, the end of September, the weather can make it a little bit challenging in Aragon, whereas now it's the earliest we've ever been to Aragon.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. I mean, it's cooled down a little bit here in Spain since, the middle of August. But, we are out in the desert in Aragon, and we do have a new track surface this weekend. So I think that is going to make things quite interesting. There was a Moto2 test at Aragon just before Austria. And, I think Pirelli and a lot of the teams were kind of taken aback by the amount of tire wear, which I think is quite normal on a new track surface. But yeah, will definitely make things quite interesting for the three classes this weekend.
What about your big memories from Aragon, Neil? Over the years, what's the one that stands out for you?
I mean, there's quite a few. Dave mentioned the great racing that we've had at the circuit, or maybe it was Adam, that mentioned it, which is definitely true. We've had some great races, some weird, dramatic races. If I had to plump for one, I'd probably go for Pecco Bagnaglia's first MotoGP victory in that late fight with Marc Marquez back in 2021. Marc obviously tailed Bagnaia for the entire GP, and we kind of thought that Marc was just basically going to pounce on his prey, as we had seen so often in 2019. He was still kind of in the midst of that injury nightmare with complications to his right arm at that point, so he definitely wasn't 100% fit like he is on the bike now. But it was also untested kind of territory for Bagnaia, and he hadn't won a race before then. He'd had a couple of chances and a couple of attempts, fallen short for one reason or another. I think Marc attempted 10 overtakes in the last 3 laps. Bagnaia was able to resist on every single occasion. And obviously it spoke of Ducati's strength. Honda, was not in the best position at that point. But it also became kind of a blueprint for some of the races that we've seen and some of the times that people have tried to take on Bagnaia in recent years and come up short, because he has his faults, but when he's on it, he can be an absolutely fabulous defensive rider and almost peerless when it comes to not cracking under kind of pressure when he's under that kind of constant bombardment of attacks. So I think that was a pretty exceptional race. And also, I was just looking, that was his first of 25 wins. If you include that race, there's been 56 races since then. Bagnaia has won 25 of them, 25 of the 57. So that's 43% of the kind of the main feature races that we've had on Sunday, which, is maybe not surprising considering he won the championship in 22 and 23. But it just goes to show you that was the start of the kind of Bagnaia era, if you want to call it that, in MotoGP. And the fact that he managed to secure it in such fine style, I think, was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, the Bagnaia Marquez race was just absolutely class. It's one of the best races we've seen for a long time. Really close, hard racing, and it really did show just how good Pecco Bagnaia was. But I mean, like, one of my, I think my memory of the one memory that I have of Aragon is of Marc. Again, it's Marc Marquez, but it's Marc Marquez and Dani Pedrosa coming together in 2013. The bikes touching, I think, out into. What is it? 11 or 12? The first left-hander of the bus stop chicane, and that cutting because there was a slight touch. It was just enough to cut the single rear wheel speed sensor on Dani Pedrosa's bike, and then as soon as he opened the throttle, he got spat off by his traction control. That changed so much. It changed a lot in the championship. It really sort of started it was one of the first moments where Marc Marquez was he was starting to get a little bit of a reputation for being an aggressive rider, but that really opened it up. And then also it forced Honda to realize that actually the design of their bikes was not at all smart in just having the one sensor. If you have one sensor and it's also and it's also so exposed, then if something goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong. It was sort of like one of those one of those moments where people realise, oh, okay, we need to start building some redundancy into our bike. It was, it was fascinating, and it was just it built into this fantastic sort of story of that season, of that 2013 season.
I kind of smile when I remember talking to Eugene Laverty at MotorLand, and he was telling me that I can't remember which corner it was now, but he said that he used a braking marker, which was like a huge skid mark on the turf that went straight into an Armco wall. And he was saying, that's the perfect entry point to the corner. And I just hope he's all right, the poor person that went into the wall. So it's kind of typical Eugene, really, to talk about a technique of motorcycle racing while thinking about somebody else. But other than that, I think just recency bias for me, guys. I think 2022, the collision between Marc Marquez and Fabio Quartararo that put sort of the Frenchman on the ground, I think that really helped give Pecco Bagnaia some momentum in that championship charge in the second half of the season. And I think it was the same incident as well when Quartararo was getting a lift back to the paddock on the back of a Marshall scooter and also managed to crash for a second time. I think he was telling us he had a couple of injuries from the scooter crash more than he did like this horrific impact during the race itself. So Fabio probably doesn't have the fondest memories of MotorLand and Aragon either.
Yeah, it's his bogey track historically. And in that race I think Ducati won the Constructors' Championship when Bastianini beat Bagnaia. But because Bastianini, as a satellite rider then, beat Pecco, I remember the camera cut to the Ducati top brass in the garage after the race. And they were all high-fiving and kind of clapping each other's backs, but with faces like the proverbial slapped backsides, because the right man hadn't won for the championship. So I remember finding that hugely entertaining as well.
I think for me, the memory that kind of sticks out to me from my time working at Aragon rather than just watching the races was probably the Moto3 race in 2015, because that's where it all really started to unravel for Danny Kent trying to win the championship. And obviously working for MCN, everything was about this could be the first time since Barry Sheene that there's a British world champion. Misano was the one that started the trend a little bit. And then Aragon, the crash, the last corner on the last lap or the second last lap, sort of left you thinking like, oh, that's 2 weekends in a row where Danny's made a mistake. But he's still got this big buffer of points. I think he had like a 50-point advantage at that stage. But those last 6 races of the year, he stayed off the podium. I think Oliveira was first or second in each of them. And you suddenly saw a guy just stumbling across the line for the World Championship. And Aragon was that big crash that sticks out in my mind for when you thought like, I wonder, is Danny actually going to be able to get over the line for this championship? So that's why it's kind of stuck in my head as one of those standout memories. But just as we look ahead to the weekend and what we can expect, Neil, are we going to be able to see Digi back on the bike and fully fit, or is he going to be held back a bit this weekend? That's one of the big talking points coming into this week.
It's going to be a tough one for him. I fully expect him to be back on the bike after his injury at Spielberg, which kept him out of the race. But he's made it tough stuff. He had his shoulder in kind of a cast after he dislocated it on the Saturday in Austria. But yeah, I expect him to at least give it a go this weekend. You would have to say could be very tricky, but I think he'll be back.
And Digi's got a great record at Aragon in Moto3. I don't think he dropped out of the top 4, but he's only got one MotoGP appearance there. I think the bigger question heading into this weekend is whether it's just going to be like another Ducati Cup. I mean, the obvious answer is yes, but just bearing in mind sort of the nature of the circuit, and we've had previous Yamaha victors there, as well as Marc Marquez obviously pushing a Honda that was on its way to on the slide, you could say. It would be, I think we have to remember the situation in 2024, especially with sort of the GP23 and 24s, and not get all dismayed when suddenly we see 5 of them fill in the top 6, for example. But having said that, the Aprilia has been pretty quick at MotorLand in the past. I think Brad Binder was P4 the last time the Grand Prix was there. Maybe KTM have found something. We can only live in hope.
I think you can kind of come to every race now and just think it's probably going to be 3 at the top of the 4 GP24s fighting for the podium. Martin Bagnaia, Bastianini, I think they're pretty much dead certs to be fighting for victory, or for the podium at least, in the kind of remaining races that we have, just on the basis of what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, and then maybe throw in, a couple of other names. I expect Marc Marquez to be up at the front this weekend. It could be a chance. I mean, we've been saying it so often before, but it could be a chance for him to break that victory duck, which has been going on for more than 1,000 days. He has 5 MotoGP victories at this track, counts it as one of his favourites. It's an anti-clockwise track, and we all know how strong Mark is at anti-clockwise venues. And I kind of, just when we think of our favourite Aragon memories, one other memory that stands out is, I think it was in FP1 in 2019. It was Johan Stigefeld, who was working for the Petronas SRT Yamaha team at that point. I think the camera went into his box, and Mark had just set the fastest lap time of the session, which was like 1.6 seconds quicker than second place. And Stigefeld's face just kind of like dropped. It was like mouth actually literally dropped wide open, just like. So, that kind of spoke of the historic strength of Mark at this venue. It's going to be really interesting to see what he can do in the Ducati. I mean, whether, he can be up there with the GP24s, but yeah, you have to imagine that he'll be a player.
No, he's definitely going to be a player. I think one thing making this likely to be a Ducati whitewash is the fact that the track's been resurfaced. So there's going to be a lot of grip, a lot more grip than usual, and that is going to play into the strengths of the Ducatis. The Ducati is the bike that can really use the extra grip of this 2024 track. The layout of it should really suit, a more flowing style. It should suit the Aprilias. It should suit the Yamaha, although let's not talk about Yamaha for the moment because, they're not competitive yet. But if you actually go back and look, the Suzukis have a really, really strong record here because the layout of the track really suited their ability to sort of carry corner speed and do that. So on the one hand, that should suit the Aprilias, but the Aprilias don't do so well on tracks which are high grip. So I think it is going to play into, and again, it's too flowing for the KTMs. There's too many long corners. There's not enough stop and go for the KTMs to be able to get in there. So I do suspect it's going to be a bit of a Ducati whitewash, but what I am going to do is make sure that I can get Marc Marquez in my fantasy team.
Yeah, if I had to choose one bike that could maybe come between some of the Ducatis, it would be probably Aleix Espargaro. I think if you take away 2020, which was an unmitigated disaster for him in Aprilia, he's been in the top 7 at Aragon every year since he signed for Aprilia. It worked well for his riding style. It works well for his bike. It's lots of time where you're kind of braking on an angle going into a corner and you're able to carry a lot of corner speed, which is something that he really likes. And he was on the podium here the last time he raced in Aragon. And I think, we could maybe see a repeat of Austria where he qualifies well. He is pretty handy in the sprint, maybe fighting for a podium place. But it does seem that Aprilia is still lacking something on the Sunday in terms of how they manage the tyre over a full race distance. So I could kind of foresee a situation where Espargaro is on the front row and maybe on the podium in the sprint, but then just not quite able to live with the kind of the relentless rhythm that the Ducatis were able to run on the Sunday.
I think Neil might have mentioned it slightly earlier, but the weather forecast for the weekend is hot. And it's going to be like 30 degrees, not necessarily sunny, a bit of an overcast sort of prediction. That's something else that obviously can come into play. And maybe just a little nod towards Taka Nakagami. This is one of his favourite tracks. I think he was on pole position here a few years ago before managing to crash out like at the end of the first lap or something. And it could be 5
corners, I think it was turn 5.
It could be timely as we're sort of waiting for an announcement that, Somket Chantra is going to come into MotoGP next year. And this could be the scene for Taka to have one final hurrah in MotoGP.
One final point scoring ride. Oh, that's tough, isn't it? That's harsh.
Yeah. Neil, quick question, Neil. Was this the first? Was this the track where Aleix Espargaro got his first podium? Because I remember he was on the podium here. Okay. Because he was on the podium in 14, I think, on the forward Yamaha.
Oh, sorry.
In the rain.
Of course. Sorry. Yeah, you're right. Sorry, I thought you were talking about Aprilia. I think you're right. Yeah, 14. Yeah, his first MotoGP podium. Yeah.
Yeah, I just remember Cal Crutchlow being quite annoyed because he just missed out on the podium, and that meant also missing out on his podium bonus, which was a big thing.
He was elbowed out of the way.
He was, yes, he was.
Neil, just very quickly as well, obviously Moto2 and Moto3 also in action this weekend. Sergio Garcia 20 points ahead of Ayagura, and I think it's another dozen points or something back to Joe Roberts in Moto2. David Alonso running away with the Moto3 World Championship at the minute. But what are you expecting from those classes this weekend?
David Alonso to be the man, and in Moto2, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I think at that private test that we had a couple of weeks ago at Aragon, the Bosco scores were working really well. Fermin Aldeguer was under the lap record, and for me, it's going to be probably the biggest story is to see how he reacts to the last couple of shocking results that he's had, where he's not really managed to, he's not finished in the top 10 in either the British or Austrian GP. He felt amazing at the test and was really positive with his feelings there. So whether he can kind of step up and get back towards the front is, I think, something to definitely look out for. But yeah, Moto2 is kind of a bit of a, it's a bit of an open class at the moment. I can see 7 riders still there fighting for the championship, and I'm including Vietti and Dixon, who are, I think, 6th and 7th, 66 and 68 points back, because they're the kind of the form riders at the moment in the series. So yeah, going to be interesting. Yeah,
and obviously for Dixon as well, Neil, moving to Mark VDS next year, and he wants to be able to continue that form he's on with the Aspar team.
Exactly. Yep. He does indeed. And they really seem to have found something with the WP chassis, which was holding them back at the start of the year. So, I think he's showing a bit more restraint. I asked him after the race in Austria if he sees himself in the championship fight, and he was a bit non-committal. And I think that was probably a smart move, not to speak too confidently. I think Jake maybe did that last year at a certain point in the Moto2 series, and then saw his championship challenge fade. He was taking it a bit more easy this time around, which is not always like him. And I think what he's been doing the last couple of weeks, he's been, in Austria he didn't have a crew chief, which was quite impressive. His crew chief was seriously ill and in hospital after Silverstone. So I think you have to count them in the kind of regular mix for the wins now.
Obviously, we've had a lot of competitions this year on the Paddock Pass podcast. One of our podcast competitions earlier on was 2 Paddock Passes to the Grand Prix of your choice through the course of the season. And Chad Johnson won that. I think he went to the Sachsenring Grand Prix as well. Really enjoyed it. And we've got another 2 Paddock Passes to give away for the end of the season as well. So we're going to run a similar competition as to what we had earlier in the year, where if anyone signs up to be a Paddock Insider through the course of the rest of the season, they're going to get the chance to enter a draw to be able to win a Paddock Pass to one of those races at the end of the year. We're probably going to leave that draw after the Misano Grand Prix, that it's for the flyaways and then for the last round in Europe as well in Valencia. So it'll be for 2 Paddock Passes to one of those last 6 or 7 Grand Prix of the year. And Adam, it's always great whenever we're able to offer a prize like that. People are able to get an insight unlike anything that pretty much money can buy, to get right into the heart of the paddock.
Yeah, sure, Steve. It's a cool prize because, like you said, Paddock Passes are not easily available for MotoGP. It just gives you sort of that insider access. So signing up to be a Paddock Insider is actually pretty good value, not just for the content, but also for the support people are giving to the podcast. And you go into, like we say when we were promoting the other competitions, you go into a draw that doesn't have a big amount of people. So it's you've got a good chance of winning.
Yeah, and the price for becoming a Paddock Insider through the course of the year, it's $10 a month, €10 a month through the course of the season for it. But if you sign up for the year in advance, it's 108. So you get a bit of a discount for that. You enter the draw, and Neil, you get huge amounts of content because you've been busy doing a few interviews for our patrons over the course of the season so far. All of our Paddock Note shows through the course of the season, and those Paddock Note shows, they're always good fun, aren't they?
Exactly, Steve. Yeah, you've got that. You've got access to competitions, access to our Discord channel. You have the chance to ask us questions, which we can then run in shows that follow Grand Prix, and access to some exclusive interviews, which we run on the Patreon channel throughout the year. So yeah, definitely worth it.
Yeah, we're trying to get more and more content for patrons through the course of the season, give everyone that little bit of an advantage for joining us on that. So check out patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast to sign up as a Paddock Insider and the chance to enter that draw for 2 Paddock Passes to one of those end of season Grand Prix of your choice as well. So we'll obviously be back in action on Thursday in Aragon as well with our Paddock Notes show. So check that out to kick off your Aragon Grand Prix weekend. And then through the course of the weekend, we'll obviously be bringing you that Paddock Notes show each night. And then our Sunday review show as well. So it's flat out busy for the boys once they get to a Grand Prix. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday shows, and then our Wednesday show as well. So that comes about thanks to Renthal Street, KTM, and Fly Racing, as well as all of our Paddock Pass Podcast Patreon supporters on patreon.com as well. So a big thank you to everyone for supporting the pod. It really does make a big difference to allow us to create this content all the way through Grand Prix weekends. And as I said, we'll be kicking things off on Thursday with our Paddock Notes show from the Aragon Grand Prix.